I'm here today with Camilo Garcia and Alexander Stemenko from Médecins Sans Frontières. As we know it, Doctors Without Borders. We're here in Odesa, Ukraine, and we're about 2/3 of the way through a wonderful series of trainings that they're offering to psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, and others at Odesa Regional Hospital Mental Health Center. Camilo, if you will, tell me about yourself and MSF.
Health Activity Manager. Well, I started working with them in 6 years ago, in 2017. I started in Mexico, by the way, after the big earthquake that we experienced in there. And so I was part of the emergency response there, and then I was sent to my first international mission in Syria. And since then I've been working with them in several places. I was before here in Ukraine 2 times already. I've been in Greece dealing with a refugee crisis already 3 times as well. I was in Mozambique, in Bolivia. So I have already some good and broad experience somehow on activities regarding mental health in crisis and in war settings.
Okay. And where is your base of operations?
Well, since I'm an international staff, then that means that once I'm called to work in a place, we have like a contract of where I develop the activities in the country, and then after that they can assign me somewhere else. So I'm usually after one mission we get some rest and then we move to the next one.
Okay. And when I think of MSF, I think of physical health, but there's a mental health aspect to this. Tell us about that.
Yes, we are very happy and honored that every year a mental health offer in MSF is getting bigger and bigger, because there's a big say around the world that there's no health without mental health. So this has been every time more relevant and important to consider in our projects, and especially because we know that Doctors Without Borders, by its name, it's a medical organization, but in many settings people are struggling not only with physical illness or not only with wounds related to war, etc., but also with mental health issues, with desperation, with stress, with anxiety, with trauma. So this is definitely the domain of mental health, and every time that we go to a place, we see the need to develop activities regarding mental health, not only for the directly affected population, but as well for those who are vulnerable to develop mental health issues as well, and that can be triggered by the conflict itself.
Tell me why MSF is here in Ukraine.
If there's an earthquake, then we deal with affected population. If there's a war, we deal with everyone who is displaced, who has traumatic experiences, and that is like our main group of attention. However, we also know that in many places the local carers, the local doctors, the local people who are struggling and dealing with these problems also need help. So we develop also programs to support these people and to help them also to develop their work in the best conditions as possible. One important thing for us as well is in MSF is to be able to support emergencies, to be able to support gaps, but at the end of the day invest on the local resources, in the local staff, in the local professionals, because at the end of the day MSF once the project or once the needs are finished or are met, it's the locals who will continue with the care. So it's important for us also invest on capacity building and investing on developing also their skills.
What do you think the war stress level is here, not only in Odesa, but throughout Ukraine?
Well, we are seeing different kind of stress levels around the country. I dare to say that everyone in the country has been impacted one way or another. So the whole country, since the war started, has been impacted somehow. Of course, those closer to the front line, those closer to the areas that are more are receiving more attacks, or more bombings, or more rockets, we definitely find more acute stress reactions. Of course, people traumatized by the experiences of losing their houses, losing relatives, etc. We are also dealing as MSF with people who has run or who has been displaced, looking for safety. They also develop different problems. They also deal with stress. They also deal with hopelessness, with worries about the future, without worries about their families that left behind. People who have fled the country as well, they are somehow affected one way or another. And we have support people in the borders, we have support people even in other countries as well, because we know that this is still a dynamic process. So people are on the move as the conflict continues, and MSF has a commitment to be there supporting the local structures to cope with this.
What does this training that you're doing at the mental health center involve?
One thing that MSF found, and we knew, it's that Ukraine has a good workforce, medical workforce, and even somehow mental health workforce. So in some other countries we come and do the full work, the full gap, we fill the full gap. But here in this country we have found a very good and experienced staff somehow. But in particular, particularly for mental health, the experience of the new generations of psychologists is not enough to deal with all the problems that comes with war, or with the particularities of the patients that we are seeing. So this course, this training was designed specially for this staff who were in need to know more techniques and more particular ways to work with the people that affected people that they are dealing with. So we tailor somehow the training for them according to their skills, according to their knowledge, and what we want is them to raise confidence, to feel with enough strategies and techniques to be able to face the problems of the patients.
If you will, Camilo, tell me about the goals and expectations that you have for yourself and for the participants in this training.
Well, particularly here, we've been very happy of how the staff has reacted. Sometimes there's not good enough comprehension, good enough understanding of what mental health can do, not only for patients but also for staff. So sometimes we have found a little bit of resistance. This in the form of, what are you going to teach me that I don't know? So very politely, let's say, and very pragmatically, we were leading them to realize, you do have the knowledge, you do have some techniques. We have the experience of how to, as my colleague was saying, make a handcraft intervention. So you have several techniques, and it's an art how to put them together to help the patient to solve their problems, or at least to reach stabilization or adaptation to the current situation. Especially because in Ukraine, psychologists or mental health were used to long-term psychotherapy. So that's what the country needed somehow before. But now we are finding acute needs, people in need for acute answers, for quick answers, to reach this stability. And that's where they were struggling a bit. So we came here to provide techniques, to remind techniques, but also to give them confidence to use them, and to give them the cues to to deliver it in a more effective way, because MSF has a lot of experience on delivering this help in the minimum amount of time possible. So
The most important things you'd like for us to know about helping people with war trauma and severe stress?
especially because war zones are very insecure, we cannot always ensure that we will be able to come back to follow a patient. So what MSF and other organizations invest usually in these settings is single shot interventions or short-term interventions. So you want to put in the bag of possibilities everything that the patient could use in the future, because you don't know if you will see them again, because they could move, because we might not come back, because the security can change. So this is a different mindsetting for mental health, very close to a crisis intervention, very close to psychological first aid, but with the particularity that we have the expertise on knowing how deep we can go during a session, and in order to not harm the patient, but at the same time reinforce him with strategies that they will be used later on.
If there were 2 or 3 things that you would want the medical professionals here to take away from your training, what would they be?
Well, first of all, the idea that it's in these settings, it's about more of connection and providing the patient as much as you can, because I think they expect to grow, for example, the trust with the patient in several sessions. So I think if they understand that it is also possible to grow trust and make an intervention in a shorter time, I think that will be a great asset for them, because they will be able to apply their knowledge in a shorter period of time that can benefit the patients. So that's the first one. And second one, that probably that they can feel more relaxed and confident on what they are doing will have an impact. Maybe it will not solve all the problems of the patient or all the problems on the country, but you can invest on adaptation, you can invest on a brighter future. From my experience in other contexts as well, I know that sometimes these smaller interventions make sense 1 year later or 2 years later as well. You know, the idea of, in that time I thought that they were just talking to me and whatever they say kind of didn't make much sense, but 2 years later they realized maybe that advice I got, that work I did with this person somehow pushed me and motivated me to move on or to go on.
How do you expect the stress levels of Ukrainians, soldiers, parents, kids, everyone to change as the winter comes on?
Definitely, in MSF we constantly work with that. We work with local doctors, with local psychologists, local nurses, local pharmacists, local logisticians that are highly motivated to help their own people. But at the same time, they are also somehow survivors of the violence, survivors of the context. They also go back home and experience explosions at night. They also come back home and experience, despair from their families, from their neighbors. So they have big workloads helping their own people, but also they have their own process. So that it's quite stressful in that part. Second part, the raise of the amount of patients they see per day and the lack sometimes of support they have for that because of lack of staff, lack of resources, lack of security. And definitely there's a lot of goodwill on their hearts to perform their profession, and they feel that all the problems are on their shoulders. They feel sometimes in need to solve every single little thing. So those three components makes them exhausted, makes them prone to burnout, makes them prone to have more discussions in their own teams, in their families. So we're trying to invest on self-care. So we invest on them to know techniques, know ways to cope with their own stress and with the stress of the patients, definitely. So in our own teams as well, we invest on not just supporting them theoretically, not just supporting them practically, but also to create the safest and relaxed as possible environment, so they also feel like going to work is not necessarily a burden, but it's a teamwork aiming the same, which is relieving suffering from the patients. Ukraine is definitely used to winter and hard winters for sure. However, they cannot escape from the seasonal mood disorders, for calling, I'm not sure if that's the correct English word, but usually in winter people can be more prone to depression, can be more withdrawn, can be more, going inside them. So we have this kind of vulnerability from before, but also winter is connected to the start of the war. So as close as we go to the anniversary of the start, the more stress and possible re-traumatization can happen. So we are expecting that maybe depression can rise, anxiety can rise, PTSD can start appearing, especially because, well, in many cases we cannot speak about PTSD yet because the level of alert hasn't come down. So in the whole country, everyone's still in alert. So they haven't been able to reach a healthy level of stability. But anyway, if you take vulnerable people with previous traumatic experiences, combined with the season, combined with the anniversary, and combined with the current stressors, then you have a bomb. And then people will start having also psychosomatic problems. Vulnerable people might also have some sort of collapse, and we need to be ready for that. So nowadays, the final stressor is the energy. So in some areas they still don't have electricity, they still don't have gas, they still don't have radiators functioning. So we will add a physical stressor. So that will impact probably badly on the population. Even though Ukrainians have shown great resilience as well. And even though they haven't been able this year to go to the forest to collect wood, because some places are still mined, they are trying to find ways to cope with this. They are preparing as well for the winter. So we are also investing on this, not only calling other partners to act and support for winterization, but also preparing and supporting people to have confidence and to feel prepared for what is coming.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with me or donors to the Linda J. Sherman Foundation that we haven't talked about today?
Well, I think this is a good chance, without trying to be too political, but this is a good chance to have an understanding on the displaced population, particularly migration. So I think that, of course, we hear that if we are far away, if we are in a different country, we hear news about the war. Sometimes we can be a little bit worried about what is happening there, but it's not with us. But at the same time, every country has received somehow refugees, let's call them refugees, displaced or migrants, who are in need not just for basic things like housing, food, etc., but also for receiving some understanding, some smiles, some welcoming, some welcome, like I know that you've been through difficult things, so we welcome you, at least for the moment. Later on we can start also solving how further we can go. But definitely people in the US, people in Mexico, people in any other country can constantly reflect on what it means to be displaced, on what it means to go somewhere else that you were not planning to go, but you end up. So this is important. And definitely consuming news, it's important in a healthy way. So not consuming a lot that you cannot bear with the information, but definitely be aware of the situation, consult different channels to get a broader understanding of the situation, so we know, we stay close to the development of this war. And definitely, without trying to sound cheesy as well, be kind to each other. So these are times that we see violence around the world, we see violence in many places, and we know that this could be a little bit like an epidemic. So we already had one, and we are still coping with that, so better to keep healthy on this one. So be kind, not just to your own family, but with every people who is in need. So I think I would say that reflection is important.